Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and a huge thank you to our guests, Heidi, Gemma, and Ben. Before we kick things off, Engineers Without Borders, and for myself personally, when we begin a meeting, an event, we always acknowledge the country that we're on. And for myself tonight, that is Wurundjeri country. I am in the north of Melbourne, coming to you from my home in Thornbury this evening, and I would like to acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging who have been stewards of this land for generations upon generations. I also like to acknowledge the lands of all of us tonight who have joined, be that in Australia or overseas, as the case may be. Tonight our purpose is quite a simple one. So in a time where we're taking things slow and considering what the world will look like in the future, it's been quite a time of reflection. So tonight is an opportunity to reflect and hear from others who've weaved alternative pathways, which in some way, shape or form have been influenced by their volunteering, be it at EWB or at other organisations. Although the three of our guests tonight have volunteered in that capacity with Engineers Without Borders. So this is an event as part of National Volunteer Week. We'd like to celebrate the work that our volunteers do, which is in many capacities across Australia, Cambodia, Timor-Leste and Vanuatu, where we work. But also for yourselves, tonight is about connecting with what motivates you, gaining some insight and inspiration, and relaxing into possibilities. So that's the invitation. My name is Sarah. I work at Engineers Without Borders in the role of Training Programs Coordinator. And essentially tonight I'm moderator, but really what we're doing here is just having a discussion, having a chat. And so my role is to keep the conversation flowing, but knowing our guests, that's not going to be too much of a concern. I'd like to also quickly introduce Bianca, my colleague. So Bianca is on tech tonight, and she's going to be assisting in the background. So on that note, you'll see Bianca later on, and I'm just going to pop her out of the room for now. We also have our wonderful guests, Heidi, Gemma, and Ben, and I'll hand over to them for a small introduction in a moment. But before I do that, I'd just like to go over the agenda of what we'll actually be covering tonight. So, acknowledgement of country and welcome, which is where we're at now, and discussing the purpose and agenda, even more so where we're at now. I'll give you some tips on how to play from home, so how this discussion will be interactive. We currently have 60 attendees on the call, so we've found a few ways in which we'll be able to have a chat with our guests as well. Move into a grounding activity to bring us all together this evening. Then we'll be having a chat with Ben, Gemma and Heidi. And after that, people will be able to come in with questions and actually come into this space, onto the screen, and ask some questions of our guests as well. We'll close up with a reflection and let everyone get on with the rest of their evening. So regarding how to play from home, we've got two assistants in the background. So Bianca, who you just met, and also Beatrix. So you may hear from them on the chat or the Q&A function. So as we chat, feel free to enter questions into the Q&A function. So that's a Q&A rather than the chat function. And if someone else asks a question that you'd really like to hear the answer to, then if you click the thumbs up, it gives us an indicator of how many people might be interested in the answer to that question, to sort of bump that up to the top a bit. And Beatrix and Bianca will be monitoring those questions and invite a few people in to join the discussion after we've had a bit of an initial chat. So don't worry so much about how that will occur. Bianca or Beatrix will interact with you on that chat function, and we'll let you know what's happening. I'd really invite you to be brave. This is an opportunity to ask questions. See what sparks for you. What's motivating for you? What would you like to hear a bit more about? And pop that question in there. So before we really get started, for everyone on the call, just take a moment to settle into where you are. For me, I like to make sure I've got my feet on the ground. It's a little nerve-wracking chatting to over 60 people tonight, so I like to place my feet on the floor of my room and consider how that's connected into the earth beneath my feet, and usually just take a couple of breaths. And I invite you to put aside whatever has been happening in the day prior, or perhaps the other things that you're juggling in this moment. And to get the most out of it, just pause and consider what motivated you to join this evening's discussion. What sparked for you when you heard about this evening's discussion? And holding that in mind, consider what is required of you to engage and relax into the possibilities that this evening could bring. So what is required of you to engage and relax into the possibilities that this evening could bring? Thanks, everyone. That's enough of me talking for now. I would love to introduce our wonderful guests. So we have, I'll pass, perhaps if I pass over to Heidi to kick us off, and then Heidi, if you want to pass on to Gemma or Ben. And it would be brilliant to hear where you're joining us from tonight. So from what country you're joining us from tonight, and what nation rather. And as the initial question, just what was your first interaction? It doesn't necessarily have to be the first, but what's like the highlight volunteering experience that you had that really altered your pathway?
Thanks, Sarah. And good evening, everyone. Great to be on here. And sorry we can't see you all, but hopefully we can see a few of you later tonight. And thank you, Sarah, for inviting me on here tonight. I was just thinking about your question, what sparked for you when you heard this topic, and lots of wonderful memories for me. And so just to where I'm calling from, I'm in Thornbury in Melbourne, in Australia, on Wurundjeri Nation, land of the Kulin Nation. But I actually originate from Yamaji country in Western Australia, and that's where I grew up. And that's actually where my volunteering started, when I was a young girl, and I really was very interested in animals. I grew up on a farm and looking after animals. So I volunteered in a local veterinary store every holidays, helped out. I loved it. But that was, yeah, definitely the start of volunteering, and I did that a lot. But one of the moments, it's hard to say highlights, Sarah. I think every volunteering experience that I've had has been quite remarkable in what I have learnt. I've certainly taken away a lot from all of my volunteering experiences. But I think there was one particular one where it was actually partly volunteering and partly doing my research project with Engineers Without Borders and the project was focused, had a theme around water and sanitation for communities, remote communities in East Timor. And I went there initially to think that, you know, this is a great pathway for me. I've been studying engineering and I really wanted to be able to contribute my engineering skills and knowledge in a way that I felt was going to benefit community or benefit people that didn't have access to that. But coming out of that, part of the project was working with a project team, uni students from Timor-Leste as well. And they were all doing the same sort of course, but it was at a different level of academia, and they were probably not at the level that we were learning. And one of the things that I really picked up from that was, you know, there are other engineers in the world or in different communities around the place that they wanted to also use their engineering skills for the benefit of the communities around them, but their skills, they didn't have the opportunities to build their skills. And so that became another great purpose of the reason why I did volunteer and continue to work with Engineers Without Borders, and I've been with the organisation for a few years. And very strongly about not only ensuring that communities can have that have access to the technical knowledge that we can contribute, but also have access to building their own skills so they can take that forward themselves.
Thanks, Heidi. And I'd love to add a little more about Heidi, who's been with Engineers Without Borders for, is it over 6 years, Heidi? Variety of capacities?
Yeah, I've been staff for about 6 years, but I started volunteering over 10 years ago, if not 15, I think. I've lost count.
When we start to whittle back, the volunteering links can sort of go on and on and on, starting with the hanging out at the vets.
Yeah.
So Heidi's been managing for some time our international programs, which then became community programs, because we also work on country in Australia. She's led the organisation as interim CEO, achieved chartered status by Engineers Australia as a community-centred engineer, and is on a couple of boards of directors on the side, including heading up the board of Oak Tree Foundation. Gemma, we met at university, and I remember being so envious of you getting into environmental engineering double degree with international studies. I didn't quite get the score, and since then you've completed your master's in community development, is it?
International development, yeah.
International development. Gemma's on the Humanitarian Field Worker roster for both MSF and RedR. She's been over to Samoa with as an AVI volunteer, and also recently on an MSF mission in Uganda. Has also been an environmental engineering consultant, and I believe is currently working for the EPA.
Yes, thank you.
I almost enjoyed the way that Heidi prompted things. So yeah, if you could tell us a bit about what prompted, motivated you to say yes this evening, and how volunteering has shaped your world.
Yeah, sure. going on what Heidi said as well, thank you so much for having me. Hearing Heidi's career, and you just summarised my windy career. It's and Ben as well. It's a real honour to be here, so thank you for having me. I'm coming from Melbourne as well, so also on the land of the Wurundjeri people. So what motivated me to take part in volunteering? I guess after high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my career, as much of us don't. Before getting into engineering and international studies with Sarah at RMIT, I did a semester of art science at Monash and failed everything because I was totally miserable. So then I decided that volunteering was the way to go. And at that time, I thought volunteering was, you know, out there and going to Africa. So I went to Africa and volunteered in Zambia and South Africa. And I came back and I realized that I did want my career to have an impact, that I wanted it to be contributing to people, but I still didn't know really what that meant. And so strangely, that experience combined with the fact that around that time, there was a lot of talk about climate change. Al Gore had just released An Inconvenient Truth. I was still really interested in science, and climate change was sort of the thing for me that brought together technology and the impact technology can have on people. So yeah, I think that the experience of Zambia and South Africa combined with where the world was at that time really shaped what I did afterwards.
Thanks, Gem. How about you, Ben? We've met through EWB Design Summits. So you kicked off your career as a civil engineer at AECOM, and then kicked over to Cambodia with EWB as a field professional. And now you're a lecturer and a butcher in a small town in New South Wales. I love your story. And yeah, if you could tell us a little bit more about where you're joining us from this evening, and what motivated you, or what sparked for you through volunteering and in your life.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, and absolute pleasure to be with the other guests here too, definitely. I just met Gemma before, so that was awesome, amongst others, and Beatrix as well. Yeah, anyway, I guess I've always had an interest mostly in people, to be honest. I didn't get into engineering straight away. I was a little bit footloose and fancy free, and traveled a little bit, tried to find myself and couldn't find myself. And then studied engineering and persisted. And I think I always had a love of process thinking and technical thought, but I also wanted to combine that with an interest in people. And I guess it took me a little while to realize that engineering is actually all about people. And that's the thing that I guess drew me most to engineering. You work with other people, but it's all about for people. And I guess I always had that vision of working with people, and I had an opportunity. I guess I was always looking for opportunities as well, particularly in my early civil engineering career. So I was always putting out feelers, and in fact, one of my first connections with EWB was with Heidi. I can't remember if it was a phone call or an email. I probably sounded incredibly naive, and potentially I still do. But she put me in touch with her counterpart in Cambodia. My partner and I traveled around a little bit and met her and found an opportunity there. And I guess that's been the start of my journey into volunteering, because with volunteering came to me through opportunities. And I think as engineers, while we might be confined by a title of civil engineer or whatever that happens to be, we're just process thinkers. That's what engineers are. And when opportunities come up, we have a chance to take those opportunities and meet different people and live in different places. So it was certainly, yeah, a bit of a, I guess, in part a selfish choice, but also a willingness to want to connect with other people and see what might be created by working with others. So my journey has been a little windy, I guess, like Gemma's as well. After Cambodia and taking up that opportunity, other opportunities came from that, and the summit was one of them. I was lucky enough to become part of the summit team and start scoping and running some summits. And then that grew into other things, and I had an opportunity to start teaching at SCU, which is Southern Cross University. They have a number of campuses, and I joined their engineering school in Lismore. And I'm currently living in a little town called Dorrigo, which is about halfway between Brisbane and Sydney on the east coast of Australia. My wife's family has a farm here, and while I'm teaching, we've found an opportunity, I suppose, to connect with community. This is what we wanted, I suppose, for us and our future family, or I should say our current family. Yeah, so we wanted to connect with community here, connect with people here. And then another opportunity came up with the local butchery. We decided to buy the butchery, and I'm now training as a butcher because I wasn't a butcher before. And that was for a love of food mostly, but also for a love of community and growing things and celebrating the things that we can create together here as a community. So yeah, my journey's certainly been about trying to connect with people, which definitely led to volunteering and has led on to now, well, all of these other little tributaries, I suppose, of the river of life. So yeah, that's my waffle. Thanks, Sarah.
That's brilliant, waffle. We had a bit of a chat about this. Actually, I chatted about this with the three of you. These wriggly pathways, and I know that when there are many times where I've questioned my career. I don't even know what that means anymore. A bunch of different jobs and interests and volunteering. But when I've questioned those times, one thing that I've started to love doing is just asking people, like, what happened? What happened from school onwards, and how did you make these decisions? I'd look at people's pathways and go, oh my goodness, I could never, say, do what this person is doing. And it all seems so sequential. My experience has shown me that's not quite the case. But the question is around, whilst there might not have initially been a long-term vision, I doubt, Ben, that you knew that you'd be owning a small business, a butchery in Dorrigo, when you first started on that engineering pathway. I'm curious about these pivot points in your careers, and what processes do you use to determine what the next step is for you and what you would like to create in the world? I have to hand that over to Heidi or Gemma. We've discussed a few options in our chats prior.
Yeah, I can jump in first, and then if Gemma wants to add some more. I think the wiggly pathway is, something, I mean, both what Ben and Gemma have experienced in terms of, I went down a science pathway and it wasn't for me, and may have had some failures there, but also the opportunities that have come my way, I've certainly just taken them. But I think for me, a big one, certainly in a time of failure, what I felt was failure, a lot of reflection, and when it's not gone my way, it's enabled me to reflect even deeper about what it is that I really want to do, and then really sort of trying to open up around, in which direction do I want to go, but knowing that I think when I was younger, I thought it was a direct line of that career. But as I moved into a few years out of school, I realised that it could be in all different directions, and it will continue to be like that. And I think it will for me going forward, going into some change and thinking about that at the moment. But I think also getting clear on what I felt that I really enjoyed and what was important to me, and then thinking about what I was good at, because it's no point doing something if you're not good at it. Like I think Gemma was saying, that you feel you don't enjoy it, so you know, why would you do it? And then thinking, for me it was thinking about what impact I want to have, and a really critical part which I've ensured I've maintained over the years is then bring that thinking to my networks, because they're a very powerful promoter of those opportunities, or connector to those opportunities. And so as soon as I chat to someone in my network, they know that sort of link in through those opportunities. Yeah, I'll let Gemma jump in now.
Yeah, no, I can definitely understand where you're coming from with those points of reflection as well, Heidi. I've certainly had them at different points in my career as well. Often they were forced on me because I'd be running at 1,000,000 miles an hour and then all of a sudden think, oh gosh, what am I doing? I don't want to be doing this. Since learning that happens as I've gotten older, I've tried to take more conscious pauses throughout my life, and sort of reassess, you know, every year or so, or more often if needed, what do I value in my life right now, and is my career aligning to those values? And I think often we place so much emphasis on a career needing to give you everything, you know, it has to be what you enjoy, it has to be what you're good at, it has to include blah, blah, blah. But I think really it's part of a fabric of your entire life. So sometimes a career might bring you certain things that you want at a particular time, but you've got other aspects of your life that contribute in different ways to what you want to be doing. So I think that's an important consideration for me as well. At different stages, you know, I've wanted to volunteer because finances haven't been a big priority for me, or I haven't wanted stability, whereas, you know, at other times in my life, those things are important to me. So I needed a, you know, full-time job and do consulting work, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, certainly taking that pause, looking at what I value and how I can make all of the different parts of my life get me to live those values. Yeah.
You also, I think, have with the values, I remember you shared with me once, Jem, like a list of, is it just a list of hundreds of values and you whittled them down?
Yeah, I stole that from someone. I don't know if it was EWB or RedR or what the roster was on, but they just had 17 values or something, and I listed them from 1 to 17 in terms of what was most important to me. And then I ranked different decisions that I was going to make. So for example, at one particular point, it was whether to go to Uganda on this MSF mission or to stay working at the EPA. And I ranked how likely each of those decisions were to fulfill that specific value. So it was a very engineering Excel spreadsheet way of figuring out a life decision. But that really helped me look at, okay, this career pathway or this particular choice at this time is going to satisfy what I'm working towards at this point. But I think that's another thing too, you know, as long as you're continuously taking pauses and reassessing, you can change your career so much more often than I think a lot of people assume, certainly when you're younger. But I mean, looking at all of our careers now, they're so wildly different and have been, yeah, they're very windy.
Yeah. I'd be curious to almost jump back in the conversation around this volunteering in the technical sector. There's our values, there's what's important to us, and the skills that we have. Heidi, you spoke to noticing that it was that you'd had the opportunity to gain particular skills, which you were then able to bring to your roles in, say, in Timor and in Timor-Leste and in your roles post with EWB. I'm trying to think of how I formulate this. what's the, I'm looking at us tonight, and I'm seeing that we're here in Australia. We've had our education, here, and I've had the opportunity to go to university, the opportunity to have safe funding, which allows us, for example, to volunteer without having a job at certain points. And how does that come into this equation around volunteering in the technical sector, around doing development work? Does anything spark for you when I speak to these points?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Gemma and Ben might add some more. I think it's definitely a privilege to be able to volunteer, in the sense of I have the time, I have the means, I have access to opportunities, and not everyone has that. And I think, you know, even Gemma alluded a bit to it, like sometimes it doesn't work. If you need to have a focus on financial gain or something to ensure security in that sense, then you might not be able to sort of take the time out to volunteer or other things. And I think there's a lot of people in the world and in Australia that don't have that option because of many different reasons. And so I guess for me, it's always been able to be certainly grateful for that privilege, but also being able to think about, well, what are the ways that we can open up those opportunities to others? And I think some of the programs that we've developed in both Timor-Leste and Cambodia have started to open that up for volunteering in those communities where it may not be so much about it's a bit of both. It's a bit about what those volunteers can contribute, but there's a really big opportunity there for them to build their skills to ultimately gain employment, which is a really fundamental element for those people in those communities, or anyone to have access to a livelihood. So yeah, I think it's an interesting space that we do get the privilege, those of us on this panel and many others get the privilege to volunteer. And that's where for me it is about, well, what can I contribute to that? I'm also conscious I gain a hell of a lot from my volunteering experiences, and certainly, you know, 12 months in East Timor as a volunteer, I thought I was going to go in with, you know, some design skills and be really useful. It was actually the other way around, that I just gained so much around personal and professional life skills that I'm very grateful for that element as well. And I've also gone into volunteering spaces where that has been a key focus, that I've wanted to get skills. I wanted to learn things out of it as well. So it depends on the different situations. Then I might let Gemma or Ben see if they want to comment as well.
And we spoke about some like selflessness. I remember I shouldn't have jumped in there. It sounds like you guys are about to go for it. What came up?
Go, Ben.
That's a bit of a rabbit warren, that one too, Sarah. But no, I would just totally agree with what Heidi said. And I think that was, I guess, a recognition for me too. When I first started in volunteering, I think naively, I thought originally that, I wanted to be able to, I guess, give something as well. And I wanted to be able to contribute in some way, and realized really during the journey that I was just getting so much more out of it for me than, well, I don't know. I hope my counterparts also enjoyed that journey too, and I'm still in close contact with them. But still, yeah, I took a lot out of it, and it shaped my future. And the reason that I wanted to move to Dorrigo with my family and reconnect with community was directly related to my experiences volunteering, and I guess the love that the people around me had for their community. So I learned to love that too. So I took a lot out of it. And then talking about selfishness and selflessness, I guess there's a really fine balance there. It's not grey it's not black and white, it is grey. I think it is nice to recognise that there is absolutely something selfless in wanting to give the time, and it is an absolute privilege to be able to do that too. But also there is a selfish side to it as well, and I think it would be naive to think that there wasn't that side as well. We're gaining a lot out of this experience as well, and I just feel lucky that I had that opportunity, basically. I'm really lucky. I don't know how much further we want to go down that road. Oh, Sarah?
I'm curious about what Gem has to say, and then we'll scoot over to some questions that have been coming through.
Yeah, agree again with what Heidi and Ben have said. Brought up a few things for me that they've both mentioned as well, but just that volunteering isn't necessarily about you having your skills and then going over to give them to other people or even share them or build things or whatever it might be. It's more supporting others that you're working with to get those skills too. So it's more about, you know, teaching and facilitation and, you know, these words around capacity building, which is a real shift, I think, in the way volunteering used to be framed when I went to Zambia and, you know, South Africa in 2005. I think that's been a really good shift in the way volunteering is portrayed. That idea as well about volunteering having to be overseas, and Ben, you just touched on this, there is a selflessness about it, but I think also going overseas and volunteering, we do because we love it and it's fun and it's an adventure. And as when people recognize that they're sort of doing it for themselves as well as other people, there becomes more of an accountability around the contribution that you're going to make because you're getting so much out of it as well. I mean, otherwise you could volunteer in an old person's home in Melbourne, but the fact that, you know, we've all gone overseas and yeah, that recognition that you're doing it for yourself too, I think is important. And definitely not wrong to do that, but just that recognition. This is kind of going down a different path too, but just around sharing skills and not having to go overseas. I'm wondering what COVID-19 is going to do for the volunteering sector, and maybe there's different ways of sharing those skills now, and it's not about going overseas for a year. It might be sharing those skills online or mentoring, or who knows what the future is going to look like in that space.
Thanks, Gem. All right. I'm going to play around, do a little bit of experimenting here. Bianca, you're going to get drawn into the room. So Bianca's here on tech support, and she's been communicating with you around some questions. So we're actually going to try to bring some people into the room with us. Have we got someone up, B?
Yeah, sure, Emily, I'm going to beam you in just a second, but if you've been asking questions, keep them coming. That's great. Vote them so that we can get the most important questions in there. Jacob, Shivani and Lauren, I've asked you guys for permission to jump in and ask your questions. So if you're on the question and answer, just pop in and let me know, and I'll line you up. So Emily, I'll bring Emily in now. Sarah, it looks as though I'm not able to bring Emily in directly. I think you need to make me the host.
Yeah, I forgot about that. One sec. So one thing that we, Bianca and myself have worked together a lot, and we try as best we can to ensure that things are interactive and engaging. So I'm pretty stoked that we've managed to find ways to do that online. So we've got Emily here, and Emily, you may need to unmute yourself and also pop your video on. It'd be excellent to see your face. Hey. Thanks so much for jumping in the room. What would you like to ask?
That's okay. I think my question's gone away and might change, but I remember the gist of it. And Gemma kind of touched or almost began to touch on it there with kind of the shift of volunteering away from a lot of the more overseas experiences to facilitating and teaching and things. But I was wondering, as things are kind of slowing down at the moment and we're seeing a decrease in overseas hands-on sort of volunteering experiences, what can we do in the meantime to help develop our skills? Like, do you have any recommendations or any other places where we can volunteer in the COVID times?
I'm happy to jump in here if you'd like. I think there's so many online courses that you can do, certainly. There's lots of Facebook groups that have bunches of people who have been overseas and do humanitarian postings that often put out really interesting articles that you can read. Just staying on top of good news sources as well, I think gives you that global perspective on what's happening, so that when the time comes that we can all start traveling and moving around again, you've got that really good idea of what's happening in the world and keeping that perspective even though we're all in lockdown. And also just, I think each of us have spoken about personal reflection being such an important thing that we've done over our careers. So taking this time to reflect on what you want, even though you can't physically go out and do things, I think that's always a really valuable thing to do that can prepare you for the future as well, even though in the time it might not feel like it.
I think there's also an opportunity to look at volunteering opportunities that have been perhaps in person, and looking at them and thinking, how could that volunteering still continue remotely and via online ways? And I know a lot of organisations, including EWB, are now looking at doing a lot more remotely, and I think it would be also critical to think about, well, what does the future look like? Because there might be fewer opportunities to actually go into communities, as I know certainly Indigenous communities might restrict, here in Australia, might restrict the amount of incoming traffic just to ensure that their communities stay healthy, and some of the countries overseas might do something similar. So looking at ways that of previous volunteering, and certainly what the communities or organisations that offered those options, how they could be done differently. And it's a great opportunity to apply some of your sort of design thinking skills and creativity and ideating different ways of doing things while still achieving that ultimate impact or the support for that community or organisation. So I know, sure Sarah and Bianca can share some of the online remote volunteering that EWB is offering as well as we go forward, but I know a lot of other organisations are doing the same.
And I had a really quick one there too, not to, I guess, drown it too much, but I think on what Gemma was talking before about also the nature of what that might be, whether it is online or potentially somewhere else, the nature of that volunteering might be around upskilling or knowledge exchange or whatever that happens to be. And so I think a traditional pathway for an engineer that is training at university might be to try to get as much of that technical skill as possible, potentially work in a space in which you get to practice that technical skill, which is great and necessary. But I would also really promote some of the softer skills, I suppose, that engineers must also have, particularly around facilitation, things like active listening and empathy and other tools that really this type of work cannot work, I suppose, without having some of those other skills. And you may think some of these are intrinsic to you, and that's excellent, but definitely you can all grow in that space. I certainly can as well, and practice and try to connect maybe with local community, and whatever that happens to be, give something that you have maybe some knowledge in that you'd like to learn or teach somebody else about, and get some of that practice. I would say retrospectively to me joining EWB, I wish I'd had more of that experience before going over to Cambodia.
And can I just add, building on something Gemma was saying and Ben as well, I think utilize, if you're wanting to work with a community or certain types of communities, learning as much as you can about their culture and their languages and their systems and how they work and all of that, because that's a critical element of working with those communities to really understand and learn and listen. And so doing what you can beforehand is a really great opportunity, and it also means that you're not sort of putting that burden on them when you do start to engage, that you're already sort of a few steps in, which is a great way to also use this time.
Awesome, thank you very much.
Thanks for the question, Emily.
Heidi alluded to some online volunteering opportunities that are coming up at EWB, and I won't go into them now, but I will ensure that there's some links to a bit more information around those and how to get involved with our volunteer chapters in the follow-up to this. So we've got Shivani.
Hi. So I'd like to address my question to Heidi, actually. I have just joined Oregon this year as a graduate acoustics engineer. And my question is, how strongly do you feel that your technical experience limits how much you can volunteer?
So how much does my technical experience limit me?
Yeah.
I think something that we were saying before is, and Ben had a similar reflection, that the more technical experience you have, the better, particularly if you're wanting to share that technical skill to someone in the community so that they can then ultimately take forward those skills and do things themselves. But it's not the complete, it's not a limiting factor, depending what you want to contribute to that organization or that community. And I think what's been mentioned tonight as well is also the soft skills are really critical. It's no point if you have a bucket full of technical skills and you don't know how to communicate them to someone who doesn't have the language that you have, or has different cultural perspectives, or works in different ways and has different thinking. And so having all of those other soft skills, and well, I don't think they're soft, so I actually call them very hard skills, but they're also very important. And so it's also about having that nice pairing of both the technical skills and those what I think are personal and professional skills. That Ben and Gemma might want to add to something around that. Thumbs up. Double thumbs up.
You nailed
Hope
it.
that helps, Shivani.
Thanks, Shivani. Bianca, are we moving in someone else? This is one thing that I'm noticing we alluded to COVID and slowing down with time for reflection. I found that everything is slowed down, particularly meetings and interactions like this, which gives me time to breathe. But whilst I'm doing that, we've got Vikrant who's just joined. Please correct me if I pronounce your name wrong.
Hey, no, you did it correctly.
Okay.
Sorry, I just dropped that for a second there. So yeah, my question was mostly for Gemma, but like free for anyone to respond. So I've been working with Arup for around 7 or 8 months now. Great company, but in terms of the job, it's not quite the humanitarian sort of thing I was hoping for. And I kind of had one of those moments of epiphany that you've all kind of talked about at some point, and kind of realized it's not really my calling. I'd rather do something humanitarian. And yeah, just any tips on how I can redirect my career in a humanitarian direction?
Good question. And I think there are so many ways to go about it, and I don't want to use my experience to tell you that that's the only path to go down, because there are so many different ways of redirecting your career. I mean, I would certainly look at potential volunteering opportunities outside what you're doing at the moment, whether that is an overseas placement or just doing something on the side, or even doing, you know, a different online course or something like that, to just work out what other ways you can spark your passions whilst you're working there, and maybe that will give you some insight into what you want to do next. Speaking from my experience, I was lucky enough to take leave without pay when I was at GHD, and I did my AVI placement in Samoa, and that opened up a lot of doors for me, but again, that's only one pathway. So yeah, try and navigate your own, but certainly don't be disheartened if you're not in the job that you want at the moment, because you can change it for sure.
Awesome, thank you.
I'm sure the others might have suggestions. Heidi and Ben can jump in.
I would mostly agree with what you've said, Gemma, to be honest. I think maybe something that, well, totally up to you, of course, but you might be able to also start to look into the types of organisations that might align with the values that you have too, kind of in the same way that Gemma was reflecting on her values. And for me, at least, I was looking around for those types of experiences myself while I was working, and found EWB and managed to get in touch with them. And there may be other organisations out there too, depending on, I guess, which field you want to end up moving into. And the other thing, I suppose, is that throughout your career, and this is certainly not a rule by any extent, but there might be opportunities that present themselves, and sometimes it takes, I guess, a little bit of courage to jump and just see what might come of something. And maybe that doesn't happen, and maybe other opportunities come in other ways. But certainly my experience was that, yeah, there were opportunities to take, but I had to actively try to take those, if that makes sense. It wasn't going to just fall in your lap. You had to start talking with people and start moving within those circles, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
But you're still young in your career too, which is also a good thing. So there's a lot of experience and learning yet to come, I think, as well.
Awesome, thank you.
And Arap's been a pretty brilliant supporter of EWB.
Yeah.
So a good puzzle there. All right, so I believe we've got someone else cruising in, Bianca. Is that a nod, if that's correct? Awesome.
Lauren's about to join us, and she has a question about EWB, but Lauren, maybe you could widen the scope of that question to include organisations other than just EWB as well.
Hi, sorry, just trying to figure out how to mute and show my video on this. Yeah, so I guess my question was focused around the opportunities that EWB has in the volunteer space. You obviously have like regional chapters around the country and around the world that people get involved in volunteering. But is there anything else for, I guess, either students or skilled engineers in terms of programs that are run and that people can get involved with either in Australia or overseas?
Well, I can take this one, and also thanks Bianca on the prompt for widening, because it would be interesting to know from the rest of our guests if something else pops to mind. So Lauren, you mentioned chapters, and for myself, my journey with EWB started with the RMIT chapter in Melbourne. We ran events on things which interested us and aligned with the values of the organisation. And then relationships from there, I think it took a hiatus for 5 years and ended up coming back to facilitate on EWB training programs. So you really never know where things will head. So joining a local chapter is certainly one. If you jump on the website, have a bit of a look around. and our local chapters have been working on how they work together a bit more online on a variety of initiatives depending on their region and where interests lie. Are you at university at the moment?
No, I'm working full time. I'm about 3 years into my career at the moment.
Cool. And which state are you in?
New South Wales.
Excellent. So New South Wales regional chapter, really strong. I will provide a bit of information in the follow-up email to this. Jumping into a meeting with them would be a pretty great way to get your foot in.
Yeah.
Also, we've got 2 challenges available at the moment, which are taking expressions of interest for some online volunteering. So we'll pop these in a follow-up email as well. And these are around getting together and pooling ideas for some design briefs that have been put together from partner organisations of EWB. I'm curious if some other ideas pops to mind from Heidi, Gemma, or Ben. And also, sorry, Ben and Heidi, it would be interesting to hear if you had ways that you volunteered with EWB that wasn't in the capacity of heading overseas as a field volunteer or on an education program. Like for myself, it was really with that local chapter.
Yeah, I've volunteered in a few ways with EWB, but also with other organisations and associations, and they're all Australia-based, and they're all types of volunteering that have moved to online. So with EWB over the years, just supporting head office with different interesting projects. So one of the pieces that I did quite a few years ago was working on the equity and inclusion policy and procedures. And so I worked with the programs team to develop what they look like and how to ensure that the technical part of the projects were being very inclusive and equitable with within the communities that they were working within. But I've also been volunteering with a Women in Aid and Development network and supported them to establish themselves as an NGO in their early days of setup, and that was just as a committee member, but supporting a lot of the events, and they've moved all of their events to virtual online forums now. And I also volunteer on as Sarah was saying, on a couple of boards, and I do that through virtual means. And so there's a lot of opportunities in different ways, and certainly for me that the board element was about building my skills in governance and leadership, but also contributing to an organisation that I had a really strong interest area in as well. And so I think there's lots of different ways to think about volunteering and contributing to communities.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where you're working at the moment as well, Lauren, but this might also go back to, was it Shivani's question before, but about mobilising corporate organisations to get involved. I know EWB has some really strong corporate partnerships, and when I was working at GHD, I was the corporate representative that sort of liaised with EWB and trying to mobilise more people within GHD to get involved in different events. So that's another way too, depending on your circumstances.
Yeah, okay. I work for Northrop at the moment, and from what I know, we don't have any kind of relationship with EWB on a corporate level. We do have other relationships with other kind of volunteering organisations that we get involved in, but yeah, EWB could be an interesting one to suggest to the higher people.
You could be our champion in there, Lauren, and start that partnership. I think the other thing, building on that Gemma was saying, we also have pro bono corporate partners who support our Indigenous projects, and they do them both remote and in community when that allows. So that would be a great one to explore further. And I'm sure Sarah can provide some contacts there.
Yeah, cool. No, thanks. That's been really helpful.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for your question, Lauren. And yeah, noted down to shoot out some contacts where you can follow up, where we can follow up some of these conversations.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Cheers.
Ready, they're just
Bianca's getting efficient. I believe we've got one more person coming to join us before we wrap up tonight.
There's been a lot of questions from people in different parts of their career, and Jacob's just kind of kicking off, so thought it might be nice to close with one from Jacob.
So I just wanted to ask you guys, because I just started my first year at uni this year, and I just really wanted to get an idea as to what volunteering opportunities there is for like students and stuff, like even if it's not engineering related, but something that can like help me with like future opportunities of volunteering that could lead me to like helping in like projects overseas, or just even working with EWB, like getting up to that level, because I'm at the moment I'm kind of unsure as to how to get to working in that like sector.
And so working in that sector, Jacob, is that around in a humanitarian sector and just sectors for impact?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, I'm not really sure where I want to go with it in a sense, but it's more like I really want to try volunteering, and I want to be able to provide and like help people with like the technical skills I'm going to be building at university. And I wanted to apply those like all those theory things that I would be learning at university into a practical sense, and to see the work that I'd be doing and hopefully help people in the process.
Volunteering sounds like the perfect avenue to both explore and help out at the same time. Heidi, Gemma, Ben, did anything spark for you then?
I'm happy to have a little suggestion, Jacob, if you'd like. But this is only what I would tell also any of the students that I'm teaching at SCU, and that is right at the beginning of your career, if you're anything like me, and like you've suggested, maybe you don't know what that path is going to turn into. And so take opportunities that you can grab onto while at university. So that might be trying to connect with local student organizations, start practicing the skills that you think you might need in the rest of your career, whether that happens to be in volunteering or not. So you have the opportunity basically to guide your own learning at university, and don't take that learning for granted. Take that opportunity to learn, is my recommendation. Guide your technical learning, that's fine, through the units that you do, but practice all of those other skills as well. So join your local committees or whatever that happens to be, so that you can practice empathizing, and you can practice active listening, and you can practice facilitation and teaching, and all of these other great skills, which, I mean, they're going to help you in whatever the career you end up in, I would suggest, but certainly it'll help in volunteering as well. And that's on a local level. And I'm sure, like Sarah suggested before, you can also probably connect with an EWB chapter if you wanted to be connected with like-minded people and EWB.
Oh, thanks, Ben. That helps.
It's really tough when you're at the very start of your career. I know, Jacob, and you're still building those skills. So it's trying to, learn and contribute at the same time. But having an attitude like you obviously do is a great start. I think as well, in addition to what Ben said, finding people who you maybe could ask, to go for coffee or have as a mentor as you try and navigate all of these things, I've found really helpful too. Pick people who you might want to be in 5 years and ask them for a coffee and see what their advice is. It's amazing what you can learn over a cup of tea from different people if you expand your networks wide enough.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jacob.
Thank you.
What a beautiful one to close on. I couldn't have said any of it better myself. And with that in mind, I'll hand over in just a moment. I just remembered something else I need to say back to our guests. I just wanted to acknowledge the amount of questions that have been coming through, and I'm sorry that we couldn't have everyone come into the room tonight. But the questions were around pathways, around redirecting careers, around building different and cross-cutting skills, getting involved with EWB and other organisations and connecting with like-minded folk. There's a couple of points I'd like to highlight there. With many people asking questions like this, you're not alone. There are so many people exploring this. And so that links into connecting with those like-minded folk who are the ones like Gemma and I who sit and philosophize at university, and then, 10 plus years down the track, look back and go, how on earth did that happen? And it happened through exploring those pathways together. So thank you so much, everyone who put their questions in, and for those of you who accepted the challenge of jumping into this virtual room with us. We've got 4 more minutes to close, and I'd love to just pass it back to our guests with a huge thank you for giving up your evenings and joining us tonight. And I'm wondering if you have any parting advice or words of wisdom on how people can weave their own impactful pathways, or tips to remember along the way.
I'm happy to start. It's not necessarily a tip. I think there's been lots of great advice and conversations tonight. This is, I guess, more just saying to the participants, it can be really daunting and scary, and you think that you're trying to figure it all out and how am I going to have the career that I want, but try to be excited too, because most of you are probably just at the start of it, and it all works out in ways that you would never have planned or never expected, but it's a really, really fun ride. So to be a bit cliche, just be excited about your career, because you will get there in windy, wonderful ways at the end of the day.
Great, great advice, Gemma. And I would just say, be open to the opportunities and to learning, and thinking about the skills that you might be able to contribute, and they could be technical or the professional skills or other areas. Even relationships and networks is a great thing to contribute, and think about how you'll do that in those opportunities, but also be open to learning and learning about different ways of working and different organisations and communities, and lots of connecting with lots of different people with diverse perspectives and different worldviews, and to just grow from all of that wonderfulness. So yeah, lots of excitement ahead.
That sounded so good, Heidi. And Gemma, that sounded awesome. Yeah, I would totally agree. And I would also say take the opportunities to learn. And I guess this is my reflection, is that learning doesn't finish, and it should be something that you celebrate. So you learn while at university, and that's just a short part of your learning journey. And you'll start working and you'll continue to learn. And then maybe you'll volunteer and you'll learn a heap, and then you'll do something else. You'll buy a butchery and you'll learn something else. But yeah, the learning journey is an exciting one to celebrate. And while there might be a few challenges or hurdles or failures along the way, you know what? They are opportunities to learn from, and that is something to celebrate as well. So don't be sort of downhearted if you hit some hurdles, I guess. There are such things as silver linings, and yeah, we don't stop learning. So that would be my last note.
Thank you from the very depths of my heart, Heidi, Gemma and Ben, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Bianca, for your wonderful tech support in our experimental interactive discussion. And we are bang on 8:15, so let's leave it there. Thank you again. We'll send a follow-up email with all the juicy, delightful bits from this evening, and I look forward to hopefully interacting with some of our attendees in a more personal fashion in the future. Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful night.